Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The Confederate veteran pictured here on the far left, Rawley White Martin, life dates 1835 to 1912, began his military service as a first lieutenant in Company I of the 53rd Virginia Infantry and rose to the regiment's lieutenant colonel before the end of the war. Wounded twice during the Peninsula Campaign at Seven Pines and Malvern Hill, he led his fellow Virginians into action at Gettysburg. On the third day of the battle, at Pickett's charge, with the man pictured next to him here, Brigadier General Lewis A. Armistead, Martin suffered a severe wound that fractured his upper right thigh. Unable to escape, he fell into U.S. hands and spent 9 months at Letterman Hospital in Gettysburg, Baltimore's Fort McHenry, and Point Lookout, Maryland, before being formally exchanged and returned to the 53rd. In 1897, 34 years after Gettysburg, Martin's account of Pickett's charge and his remembrance of Armistead was published in the Southern Historical Society papers, which you students of the Civil War know is an important resource for post-war reminiscences of Southern soldiers. I want to share a passage from Martin's recollections, which he submitted in response to a request to share his Gettysburg experience. The passage begins with the end of the bombardment and just before the men of Pickett's division and Armistead's brigade marched to meet their Union foemen, and for many of them, their deaths. Martin begins, soon after the cannonade ceased, a courier dashed up to General Armistead, who was pacing up and down in front of the 53rd Virginia Regiment, his battalion of direction, which I commanded in the charge and at the head of which Armistead marched, and gave him the order from General Pickett to prepare for the advance. At once the command, "Attention battalion," rang out clear and distinct. Instantly, every man was on his feet and in his place. The alignment was made with as much coolness and precision as if preparing for dress parade. Then Armistead went up to the color sergeant of the 53rd Virginia Regiment and said, "Sergeant, are you going to put those colors on the enemy's works today?" The gallant fellow replied, "I will try, sir, and if any mortal man can do it, it shall be done." It was done, but not until this brave man and many others like him had fallen with their faces to the foe, but never once did that banner trail in the dust. For some brave fellow invariably caught it as it was going down and again bore it aloft until Armistead saw its tattered folds unfurled on the very crest of Seminary Ridge. After this exchange of confidence between the general and the color bearer, Armistead commanded, "Right shoulder, shift arms, forward march." They stepped out in quick time, in perfect order and alignment, tramp, 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 up to the Emmitsburg Road. Then the advancing Confederates saw the long line of blue nearly a mile distant, ready and awaiting their coming. The scene was grand and terrible and well calculated to demoralize the stoutest heart, but not a step faltered, not an elbow lost the touch of its neighbor, not a face blanched, for these men had determined to do their whole duty and reckoned not the cost. On they go. At about 1,100 yards, the Federal batteries open fire. The advancing Confederates encounter and sweep before them the Federal skirmish line. Still forward they go, hissing, screaming, shells break in their front, rear, on their flanks, all about them. But the devoted band, with the blue line in their front as their objective point, press forward, keeping step to the music of the battle. The distance between the opposing forces grows less and less until suddenly the infantry behind the rock fence poured volley after volley, into the advancing ranks. The men fell like stalks of grain before the reaper, but still they closed the gaps and pressed forward through that pitiless storm. The two advancing brigades have thus far done the fighting. Armistead has endured the terrible ordeal without firing a gun. His brave followers have not changed their guns from the right shoulder. Great gaps have been torn in the ranks. Their field and company officers have fallen. Color bearer after color bearer has been shot down, but still they never faltered. At the critical moment, in response to a request from Kemper, Armistead, bracing himself to the desperate blow, rushed forward to Kemper's and Garnett's line, delivered his fire, and with one supreme effort, planted his colors on the famous rock fence. Armistead himself, with his hat on the point of his sword, that his men might see it through the smoke of battle, rushed forward, scaled the wall, and cried, "Boys, give them the cold steel." By this time, the Federal hosts lapped around both flanks and made a counter advance in their front, and the remnant of those three little brigades melted away. Armistead himself had fallen, mortally wounded, under the guns he had captured, while the men who followed him over the fence were either dead or wounded. The charge was over. The sacrifice had been made. But in the words of a Federal officer, banks of heroes they were, they fled not, but amidst that still continuous and terrible fire, they slowly, sullenly recrossed the plain, all that was left of them, but few of the 5,000. When the advance commenced, General Pickett rode up and down in rear of Kemper and Garnett, and in this position he continued as long as there was opportunity of observing him. When the assault became so fierce that he had to superintend the whole line, I am sure he was in his proper place. A few years ago, Pickett's staff held a meeting in the city of Richmond, Virginia, and after comparing recollections, they published a statement to the effect that he was with the division throughout the charge, that he made an effort to secure reinforcements when he saw his flanks were being turned, and one of General Garnett's couriers testified that he carried orders from him almost to the rock fence. From my knowledge of General Pickett, I am sure he was where his duty called him throughout the engagement. He was too fine a soldier and had fought too many battles not to be where he was needed most on that supreme occasion of his military life. The ground over which the charge was made was an open terrain with slight depressions and elevations, but insufficient to be serviceable to the advancing column. At the Emmitsburg Road, where the parallel fences impeded the onward march, large numbers were shot down on account of the crowding at the openings where the fences had been thrown down, and on account of the halt in order to climb the fences. After passing these obstacles, the advancing column deliberately rearranged its lines and moved forward. Great gaps were made in their ranks as they moved on, but they were closed up as deliberately and promptly as if on the parade ground. The touch of elbows was always to the center, the men keeping constantly in view the little emblem which was their beacon light to guide them to glory and to death. I will mention a few instances of individual coolness and bravery exhibited in the charge. In the 53rd Virginia Regiment, I saw every man of Company F, Captain Henry Edmonds, now a distinguished member of the Virginia Bar, throw flat to the girth by an explosion of a shell from Round Top. But every man who was not killed or desperately wounded sprang to his feet, collected himself, and moved forward to close the gap made in the regimental front. A soldier from the same regiment was shot on the shin. He stopped in the midst of that terrific fire, rolled up his trousers leg, examined his wound, and went forward even to the rock fence. He escaped further injury and was one of the few who returned to his friends, but so bad was his wound that was nearly a year before he was fit for duty. When Kemper was riding off after asking Armistead to move up to his support, Armistead called him and, pointing to his brigade, said, "Did you ever see a more perfect line than that on dress parade?" It was indeed a lance head of steel whose metal had been tempered in the furnace of conflict. As they were about to enter upon their work, Armistead, as he was invariably his custom on going into battle, said, "Men, remember your wives, your mothers, your sisters, and your sweethearts." Such an appeal would have made those men assault the ramparts of the infernal regions. You asked me to tell you how the field looked after the charge and how the men went back. This I am unable to do, as I was disabled at Armistead's side a moment after he had fallen and left on the Federal side of the stone fence. I was picked up by the Union forces after their lines were reformed, and I take this occasion to express my grateful recollection of the attention I received on the field, particularly from Colonel Hess of the 72nd Pennsylvania, I think. If he still lives, I hope yet to have the pleasure of grasping his hand and expressing to him my gratitude for his kindness to me. Only the brave know how to treat a fallen foe. I cannot close this letter without reference to the Confederate chief, General R.E. Lee. Somebody blundered at Gettysburg, but not Lee. He was too great a master of the art of war to have hurled a handful of men against an army. It has been abundantly shown that the fault lay not with him, but with others who failed to execute his orders. Thanks for listening to this story of Pickett's charge, the right in the center of the fray with the 53rd Virginia Infantry. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.